everyone, welcome to episode number 49 of the Bill Podcast, and in this episode we'll be going through CloudFlare that can help us manage our DNS settings along with some performance and additions to the security for our web page. Now, to get started with CloudFlare, it is really easy. All you need to go and sign up and then log into your account. And of course, this home page itself will also give very helpful links towards the features, an introductory video, and lots more features and documentation on CloudFlare. Do also check out the plans of CloudFlare, which gives us some free version, some enterprise version, and a pro version. For this episode, we will be going through the free version, but nevertheless, going through the plans and the features will be helpful to decide on which plan we want to use, whether it is for our side project or for client project or for our own company. While going through CloudFlare, I felt that a revision of what are the different types of DNS record came in really handy. And of course, as usual, this Wikipedia article is very useful. Also, while we are going through this episode, we will be touching on a lot of previously built knowledge. One of them will be using local web server, especially Apache, the default one for Mac. The second one will be a little bit understanding of what is performance and why slow episode will come in really handy. And lastly, we will also be hosting a very simple HTML page using the EC2 AWS. So be sure to check out these 3 episodes if you are unfamiliar with these topics. Great, so let's get started with CloudFlare. So I have already created an account, so I'll just go ahead and log in. And once I log into the page, it will directly redirect me to /my-websites. This is where you will keep on adding all the websites. So just as a demo, let me add in my own website, and I can go ahead and click Add Website, and it will basically perform a 60-second record scan. Looks like the scanning is almost complete. And once that's done, we can continue on to the setup. Now, inside the setup, as part of the first step, it will basically give us the records for the available website. And as you can see, it will also create some of them, such as direct, FTP, mail. And it will also give you a little bit of description on how it can come in handy. Now, every time you want the traffic to pass through CloudFlare, you can just make it active. And if you do not want it, you can just make it inactive like so. But I'll just leave it on just for the demo. Looks like everything is good. If you are missing any subdomain or any other DNS records, be sure to add it here as well. So after I have added everything, let me go ahead and continue. And these are some additional settings. Now over here, you'll have to choose a plan. For our case, we will go ahead and choose the $0 free per month. But do go ahead and check out the plans page in detail. For performance, I will also go ahead and choose, say, bleeding edge. And let's say for security, I'll just go ahead and choose high. But be sure to read the fine lines to better understand what it does. And yes, I am fine with IPv6 as well as smart errors. So let me just continue. And this is where you will have to update your name servers. So it has detected my current name servers and it wants me to change it to this. Now, for the purpose of this video, I will just pretend that my name servers have been updated. So let me just continue. And it will bring me back to /my-websites where it will list the newly added website along with the rest. As you can see, it will take up to 24 hours to complete this process. And therefore, I have already prepared another website, which is build-podcast.com itself, and we will work on this one. But to my knowledge, when I added buildpodcast.com, it actually took me less than 20 minutes to get this set up. So firstly, let me go ahead to the domain registrar of Build Podcast, and let me show you where I edited the name servers. So here I am inside my domain registrar, and typically you will find a place to edit your name servers. Previously it was the original name server which I edited to jeffandora.ns.cloudflare.com. And after I did this, I went back to CloudFlare, and this is what you will see, a little check sign to say that, hey, this domain is on CloudFlare. So from now on, we will be working on this domain. So let me just go ahead and delete the previous one. Great, so since we have a working website which is running on CloudFlare right now, let's look at some of the settings. So if you come here, we will explore the apps later on. Let's look at analytics. This is pretty interesting. As I started adding this website just a few days ago, you can already see the statistics right here. It will give us how many unique crawlers as well as threads, a little bit of security information and statistics. And of course, if you want a little bit more detailed, you will have to get the Pro account. Next, there is also the thread control. Let's have a quick look at it. Here you can go ahead and add your custom rule in terms of adding some IP or IP ranges to block as well as trust. Basically a blacklist and a whitelist. Lastly, there is also this little settings for the website, and when we click, more settings crop up. Obviously, the delete domain is very obvious, and so is the pause CloudFlare. I like to put it in development mode when we are playing around with some of the CloudFlare settings. So let's do that. Let's enter the development mode. And in this case, if you see, the development mode will be automatically toggled after 3 hours. And also the accelerated cache will be disabled, and some settings there just to make it a little bit more developer friendly. There are also page rules, which we will take a look at it later, and CloudFlare settings as well as DNS settings. Let's go through firstly DNS settings. Now by default, it will already include some stuff, for example, a direct, FTP, mail, or even a www. Let's go ahead and add some more. Now for the purpose of this episode, we will be serving up very simple HTML pages through these 4 means. We will be using a simple web host via FTP to kind of display the index.html page. We will be also using GitHub as well as my own laptop that I'm using right now, as well as AWS EC2. And through these 4 means, you will see how consolidated and easy CloudFlare is, especially for DNS settings and management. So let's start with the very first one, which is using my own web host. So for this, we will go to the cPanel, and let me just add in a subdomain. I'll just call it subdomain, and inside the build podcast folder, and let's create it. And after I create it, I can go back to the folder in my FTP or file manager, and inside the folder subdomain, I'll basically put in a very simple index.html file. Let me just show you that file. It is as simple as just a header tag and a paragraph tag. So I'll just drag and drop it. And after this, if you try to access the subdomain.the domain name, if you refresh it, well, the website is not available. This is when we come back to CloudFlare, the DNS settings, and right at the bottom, let's add a CNAME. And I'll just put in the subdomain name. It's an alias of build podcast. And now let's add it. After we have added it, ensure that it is enabled so that the traffic goes through the CloudFlare. And now when I come back and refresh it, after about 5 minutes or a few minutes, when I refresh this page once again, guess what? We can now see our web page. Very similarly, now let's go on to GitHub pages. For this, as usual, let's first create a subdomain. So for this, it will be ghpages.buildpodcast, and it will be inside the build folder. Firstly, we will create a new GitHub repository, which I have already created. And this one will be really simple. It will have a readme.md file. But more importantly, in the branch, this specific name, gh-pages, let's go to this branch. It will have one file called index.html, which we will be serving up. And if you look at the code here, it is also very simple, just like the previous example, just that in the paragraph, we will say, hey, this is from a GitHub page. It will also contain one file called CNAME. And this CNAME will consist of the subdomain.domain name. Now, in order to access this static page, we will go to the username, the GitHub username.github.io/the repository name. In our case is GitHub-CloudFlare. And once we do this, we will be able to see the same page as it is in the index.html of the GitHub repository. So there you go, it shows the very same code. But let's say we have a subdomain githubpages.buildpodcast.com. Well, currently Google cannot find this page. So let's go back to DNS settings. And this time we will add on a CNAME and give the subdomain name. And as you can see from the GitHub pages, we will include this domain name. So it will be username.github.io. So let's add this. And now when we come back to this subdomain .mydomain.com and we refresh it, so let's give it some time. And yes, it is displaying the GitHub pages content right here with the subdomain. So once again, you can host your static content in GitHub pages. You can view the same content in this URL pattern username.github.io/the repository name. And using the CloudFlare DNS setting, you can basically route it to your own subdomain or domain name. Moving along, let's explore how we can basically host a page in this laptop and make it viewable through the internet. So for this, the very first thing we will do is create the subdomain, and in this case it will be just home to indicate that it's from my laptop. And let's try to visit this page. Obviously there'll be nothing as of now, and yep, it could not be found. The next thing we will do is start up our Apache server. So it will be sudo apache ctl and then start. Great, so seems like it is already running. Let's just quickly check the virtual host file. So I'll open this up in a text editor. And over here, we just have to make sure that the port 80 is basically serving up a particular folder. For me, it is the sites folder. And let's go inside the sites folder. I do have an index.html already prepared. And let's quickly view the contents of index.html. And yep, it is the very similar content, but this time the paragraph is right from home sweet home. And now when I go to the browser and check localhost, yep, it is running that exact same file. But how can I make this page be viewable to the internet, or rather the external world? So for this, let me open up the router and let me get inside the settings. Let me do that via the network, and over here in the port settings, let me add on. So maybe I can just say it is a home status. And the public TCP port will be 80 and the private TCP port will be 80 as well, as I am using it in the port 80. And as for the private IP, my private IP address for this laptop is .22. So let me just save it and update it. So while it's updating, why don't I go ahead and check out what is my computer's IP address. And once you have the IP address, let's try to access it. And guess what? Since we did the port mapping, it will basically serve up the same page, but this will be viewable from the external network. Now we want this exact same content to be mapped to this page. So for this, we will go back to our DNS settings on CloudFlare and let's say home, and this time we will point it to the IP address, and for this it will be my computer. And let's add it. Now when we come back to the subdomain and refresh it, nothing's happening as usual. Let's give it some time. And this time when I refresh it, the page finally appears. But this page, as you saw before, it is being served up right from my computer. And finally, we will go on to AWS EC2 Management Console, and we will create a simple web page there. And we will also direct the traffic through CloudFlare. So here I am inside the AWS EC2 Management Console. So let's go inside the instances. I've already created one, but I have stopped it. So let me go ahead and restart it and start. Once it is running, we can scroll down and then take the public DNS. Now, by the way, I have already installed the Apache server HTTPD, and there is also a very simple index.html running there. So let's take a look at it. Well, obviously the Apache server is not started. So let me go to the command line and log in via SSH. And I will refer to the key pair and then the username, which is ec2-user @ and then the public DNS name. So once I log in, let me just act as the root. And let me quickly just show you the contents of the simple HTML file that I've already put in. And there you go, it's a really simple one with some head and the body tags, but it says essentially the same thing. We have a page from AWS EC2. So after this, I'll just start up the Apache server, which is service HTTPD start. And now when I visit the public DNS page and I refresh it, yep, I am able to see that very familiar page. And now we can go back to CloudFlare and create an A record pointing to an IP address. But where is the IP address? Well, it is part of the public DNS. So let me just copy this number right here. After EC2-, this is the IP address. and let me just create a record, call it AWS, and instead of the dashes it will be dot. Right, so now after I add it, ensure that it is going through the Cloudflare. Now when I come back and refresh, so let's wait for a while as well. And finally, after hitting refresh after a few minutes, we have the page being served up. So in summary, we have covered these 4 cases, how Cloudflare makes DNS records management very easy. We have started with a simple subdomain and the page was hosted in our web host. Next, this was from our own computer and it was mapped to the domain, the subdomain home. Thirdly, it was from the GitHub pages, the project page, and it was also mapped to a certain subdomain. And finally, it was AWS, which was mapped to another subdomain. So now I can just go ahead and stop the instance. Apart from the DNS settings, let's go through something called the Cloudflare apps. So for this, I will go back to websites, and under each of my website, there will be the link called apps. Now over here, we can add on various apps. So let's go ahead and scroll down and take a look at some of them. For example, there is CDN.js. And here you can basically load scripts from a content delivery network. So let's try on Modernizer and you can turn it on. Or even if you go further ahead, you will also see Google Analytics. So let's just try out. Let's do a simple setup. Previously, I've already tried out with the analytics code that is embedded in my blog, and you can just submit it and turn it on. Or even say Google Webmaster. So we can just start with some authorization and get back to apps. Let me also show another one which I tend to use, which is also called Better Browser, which warns the user with a simple message if the browser version is old. So you can go ahead and choose the version number. Maybe I'll choose IE7. So anybody that is lower or IE7 will get this notification. Finally, let me go through this little application called Highlight. So basically, if you highlight a word, it will show you some contextual search. So let's say I come back to this domain and try to highlight the word explore. Well, nothing is happening. But when we turn this on and this app is now activated, and I go back to this home page and refresh the page, and now when I highlight the word explore, notice how you can get more information or even some pronunciation with it. So do explore many of the apps that comes with Cloudflare. And it makes a lot of either user activities or gathering some stats regarding the website really, really easy. As a final note, let's go through the Cloudflare client-side API, which I find really helpful if you want to make certain things automated. So all this while we were using the user interface. And whether we want to change some DNS settings or even look at some analytics in this case, all these graphs and such information are presented to us graphically. Now, if you want to make it scriptable or automated, you can access this client-side API. Of course, it will depend on the programming language of our choice, but just as a use case, let's just try out a very simple one. How about this simple stats? So I'm gonna copy this and put it in my command line. But of course, we have to kind of change certain parameters. Now, as said in the document, A is the type of information, so that will be stats for our case. And then there is this thing called the token. So in order to access the token, let's go back to Cloudflare and we will access our account. And once you do that, you will see your API key right at the bottom. So I'm just going to copy it and replace the token with this. Now the email will be your account email. So let me just quickly replace that. And next will be the domain name. So let me replace example.com with the domain we want to query and the interval. So once again, if we go back to the documentation, the interval 20 means past 30 days. But for the sake of comparison, I'll just take the last 7 days, and that is basically 30. So let me go ahead and change the interval to 30. With that, let me just run this in the command line. So I'll come back here and curl this page with certain query parameters. And there you go. After quite a bit of time, the API has yielded some results. And if we kind of dive in a little bit, you will see that, hey, the regular counts were 276, thread 14, and crawler 19. And this basically matches the analytics numbers that we see right here. So CloudFlare API can be really useful to either query certain stats or even post a change in the DNS settings or other settings. Now, finally, before we end, when we come to the website, there is also the overall CloudFlare setting, which comes in really handy, especially in terms of performance and security settings. So let's have a quick overview. So CloudFlare settings, you have the settings overview. You have some cache, some automatic IPv6, even geolocation SSL, which of course you will need some pro account. And also there are some security settings, as well as performance settings. These are pretty self-explanatory, and just go ahead and play around with the settings as and when needed according to your project. So that's it about CloudFlare. I really find it very handy and simple, especially in terms of the user interface and also the information provided to kind of configure my DNS settings, and also a little bit of security and performance. And of course, there are pro features to cater for more advanced ones. Now, a little bit about other blog posts and videos that I picked up some knowledge about CloudFlare. You can have a WordPress CloudFlare CDN plugin as well. So if you are using WordPress as a blogging platform, do consider the plugin, as well as another plugin called W3 Total Cache. There is also a tutorial by SiteGround on CloudFlare CDN tutorial, and there are some instructions on how to enable CloudFlare CDN and some statistics and so on and so forth. I also came across this very short video that was handy in understanding what CloudFlare does and a little bit of the overview. And as a final note, I also want to point out this alternative service, which is CloudFront by Amazon, which is part of AWS. Well, obviously you can do a little bit comparison on which one you like, and based on the project and your preference, you can choose either CloudFlare or CloudFront. Finally, for the build link of the episode, it is the ESOcast by the European Southern Observatory. So it is a video podcast, very high quality, which talks about the various telescopes, about ESOcast, as well as their discoveries about the universe. I have been watching this podcast over the past 2 to 3 years, and every time they talk about their telescopes, I wanted to visit them. And well, guess what? In the past month, when I was not doing Bill Podcast, I had a chance to visit this VLT, which is found in the Atacama Desert of Chile in South America. So there I am with the telescopes right in the background. They are actually really, really huge, like this, and I really got to see the telescopes in person after watching this podcast for so many years. It is really inspiring to see the work of engineering and how programmers, hardware engineers, astronomers, physicists all come together to find out more about the universe. So no matter what we are programming, I find this gives us a little bit inspiration about the whole universe out there. So that's it for this week's episode of Build Podcast. And for all other episodes of Build Podcast, visit build-podcast.com, and you can get your automated notification through either RSS, GitHub, iTunes, YouTube, or Vimeo to get your content. And I'll see you in the next episode. Goodbye.